The elevator doors opened to a hotel lobby loud with distant jazz music, and I saw her. Brenda stood by the concierge desk, her head thrown back, laughing freely with a man whose hand rested casually on her lower back. My chest tightened into a fist, a punch that stole the air. Her eyes, bright and unfocused, then met mine for a fleeting moment before she turned away, a dismissive flick of her wrist. The afternoon sun, pale and thin in late autumn, stretched across the polished hardwood floors of the living room. It caught the dust motes dancing lazily in the air, illuminating the careful arrangement of Brenda's hand-picked furniture. This house, a sprawling monument to quiet suburban success, felt more like a museum now. Everything was in its place, perfectly ordered, yet it hummed with a silence that pressed down on Frank. He sat in his leather armchair, a financial journal open on his lap, unread. He had everything a man was supposed to want, yet the desperation clinging to him felt thick as river mud. Brenda. Her name was a whisper in his mind, carrying the scent of lilac and a memory of vibrant energy. She was beautiful, undeniably. Her blonde hair, her easy smile, the way she made any room feel brighter. They had seemed to have it all, the enviable couple, their life a smooth, unblemished surface of cocktail parties, golf club memberships, and annual trips to the Caribbean. A perfect life, or so he had always told himself. He had believed it with a blind, unwavering faith. That faith had died in a hotel lobby. It had been 6 months ago, a business trip to Chicago that he'd cut short. Brenda was supposed to be at a conference presenting some new marketing strategy. He'd arrived a day early, hoping to surprise her, to share a quiet dinner away from the usual suburban hum. Instead, he got off the elevator on the ground floor, saw the high ceilings, the muted golden marble, the soft, distant jazz. Then he saw her. She was laughing, a sound that used to make his heart lift, now twisting it. The man, a stranger with a neat beard and a confident lean, had his hand on the small of her back. Not a gesture of polite acquaintance, but something familiar, possessive. Brenda's head was thrown back, her throat exposed, a sight usually reserved for him, for their private moments. Their eyes had met for half a second. Her face, flushed with amusement, had registered a flicker of something. Then she had turned away, her smile returning to the man. It was a gesture of dismissal, casual and complete. The raw shock had hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. The truth, cold and sharp, had sunk its teeth in. Infidelity, it wasn't a question, not a suspicion. It was a fact, laid out under the bright, indifferent lights of the lobby. It shattered his world, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating sound of glass cracking. Every secret glance, every hushed phone call she'd taken in the other room, every late-night work dinner, now replayed in his mind, stripped of their innocent veneers. The times she'd been too tired, too busy, too distant. They weren't random occurrences anymore. They were connected, a cold, calculated pattern of deception, a betrayal right under his nose. He had been blind, willfully so, perhaps. His love, once a comforting warmth, turned to ash in his mouth. His trust, once a solid foundation, evaporated like steam from hot asphalt. A cold resolve settled in, hard and unyielding. The man who had walked into that lobby, easygoing and privileged, was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone capable of seeing things clearly, of acting with a purpose he had never known. He would become someone capable of dismantling what had betrayed him, piece by agonizing piece. The cost of peace, he understood then, was often too high. It demanded complacency, turning a blind eye. Disruption, on the other hand, held a strange, dark allure. It promised clarity, a brutal honesty that felt perversely liberating. He reached for his phone, a heavy, expensive device. His fingers moved with a deliberate slowness as he scrolled through old contacts, finding a name he hadn't used in years. Mr. Schmidt. The name itself felt like a relic from another life, a life where problems were handled with quiet discretion, where information was currency. The phone rang twice before a calm, measured voice answered. Schmidt, it said. No greeting, no question. Frank Miller, he replied, his own voice sounding flat, foreign. I need some information. A beat of silence. About what specifically? Mr. Schmidt asked. The voice was unhurried, unflappable. "My wife," Frank said. The word felt brittle, alien. "Everything. Where she goes, who she sees." "I see, Mr. Schmidt," responded, the two words holding a weight of unspoken understanding. "Consider it handled. I'll be in touch." He hung up without another word. Frank set the phone down, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. A long line of successful men, builders, and industrialists stretching back through generations. Men who had always been in control, men who had commanded respect. Now his name, his life, tarnished by this quiet public betrayal. His grandfather, a man of iron will, had built an empire from nothing, from fields far removed from these manicured Midwestern lawns. He wouldn't have understood this softness, this humiliation. Frank, on the other hand, had drifted through life, insulated by that inherited wealth. He had gone to medical school, not out of passion, but to avoid the family business, to preserve his fun, as he'd put it at the time, a shallow justification for a privileged existence. He remembered his friends, bright, well-dressed, equally adrift. Spoiled kids with more money than common sense. All of them. He had been one of them. Now staring at the ruins of his perfect life, he finally saw the truth about himself. Stark and undeniable. Frank leaned back in the worn leather armchair, the financial journal forgotten. The quiet hum of the house was a thin veneer over the memories that had begun to surface. Not like whispers, but like photographs emerging from a developing bath. His thoughts drifted, pulling him further back to a different time, a different kind of excess. It was a city much like this one, but grander, vibrant with the energy of the 1930s and 40s, a Midwestern hub for old money and new ambition. Chicago, perhaps, or St. Louis. The details blurred, but the feeling remained sharp and clear. He remembered the exclusive clubs, the hushed conversations over amber liquids, the grand events where fortunes were quietly made and lost. He remembered the lively nights, the jazz clubs thrumming with saxophone laments and syncopated rhythms, the opulent ballrooms where women in silk glided across polished floors, their laughter echoing like scattered pearls. It was a world he had floated through, a privileged bystander, always observing, rarely fully participating. One establishment stood out, the Lakeside Ballroom. It was a popular, somewhat scandalous place, known for its live orchestras and the way its main floor was subtly divided. On one side, white linen tables for dining, clinking silverware, hushed conversations. On the other, a wide, open space for dancing, filled with couples swaying under the soft glow of 100 small lights. It was where people went to be seen, to forget, or to find something new. He was young then, perhaps 25, fresh out of medical school, not yet burdened by the expectations of the family empire. He sat at their usual corner table, a spot offering a clear view of the entrance and the dance floor. Jim Davies was beside him, already on his second bourbon and soda, his face flushed with easy amusement. Across from them, Pete Olson, a practical sort, was dissecting the stock market with an intensity usually reserved for surgical procedures. Frank, as always, watched the crowd, a habit he'd developed early, a quiet assessment of faces, gestures, unspoken narratives. Then they arrived, a couple stepping in from the chill night, shaking off invisible snowflakes. Frank's gaze fixed on them instantly. He recognized the man first, Dale Peterson. Dale was from the Riverside Club, a regular, always impeccably dressed, always with a new woman on his arm. Not as wealthy as Frank, not by a long shot, but Dale had a certain charm. It was an easy, practiced way with women, a confident tilt of his head, a smile that seemed to promise just enough danger to be exciting. But it was the woman with him who truly captivated Frank. Sarah Jensen. Her dark hair, almost black, framed a face that was both striking and composed. Her eyes, a deep, liquid brown, seemed to hold a quiet intelligence that drew him in. She wasn't simply pretty, she possessed a presence. She wore a dress the color of midnight, cut to reveal just a hint of collarbone, and carried herself with an understated elegance that announced her lineage. Frank knew the Jensen name, an old, established family, their wealth not ostentatious, but deeply rooted, like ancient oaks. As they paused, waiting for the maitre d', Her eyes almost imperceptibly swept across the room. For a split second, they met Frank's. It was a quick, unspoken glance, a flicker of mutual intrigue that passed between them before she looked away. There was no smile, no overt invitation, just a recognition, a spark that ignited something deep within him. Dale, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the moment, leaned in, speaking something close to Sarah's ear. Her head tilted and a soft, genuine laugh escaped her lips. She turned back to him, her full attention now focused, a clear indication she was taken, absorbed in his easy charm. The brief, almost imperceptible connection between Frank and Sarah was broken. A new obsession began to form in Frank's mind, cold and precise. He must meet this woman. The thought settled with the weight of an undeniable truth. He watched as Dale took her arm, guiding her to a table near the orchestra, a prominent spot. As Dale settled into his chair, he reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a slim silver case. He extracted a cigar, a thick Cuban, then tapped it against the rim of his ashtray. A familiar gesture. Dale always smoked a cigar. It was a telltale sign of his routine, a small detail Frank filed away, already observing the man who held Sarah's attention. The lakeside ballroom pulsed with a muted energy as dinner service drew to a close. Frank kept his eyes on Dale Peterson's table, watching the easy flow of conversation between Dale and Sarah. He knew Dale's habits, his predictable rhythms. After a meal, especially with a new conquest, Dale would invariably step outside for a cigar. It was a small vanity, a moment to reflect on his perceived successes. Sure enough, a few minutes after the coffee arrived, Dale excused himself with a charming smile that Frank could almost feel from across the room. He patted Sarah's hand, a casual, proprietary gesture, and then rose, heading towards the heavy oak doors that led to the terrace. Frank waited a beat, then pushed his own chair back. He walked casually, not following, merely strolling in the same direction. The night air hit him, cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of the lake. Dale was already there, leaning against the wide stone railing, a plume of fragrant cigar smoke curling into the darkness. He held the Cuban between two fingers, gazing out at the black expanse of water, dotted with the distant lights of boats. Frank joined him, positioning himself a few feet away, leaning on the cold stone. They smoked in silence for a while, a casual, almost ritualistic exchange between men who knew each other from similar circles. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the lake against the shore and the distant strains of the orchestra from inside. Finally, Frank took a slow drag from his own cigarette, then exhaled, watching the smoke dissipate. "That's quite a lady you have with you tonight, Dale." Dale took his cigar from his mouth, a smirk playing on his lips. He flicked ash into the darkness. "She is, isn't she?" His voice held a note of smug satisfaction. "Sarah Jensen, from the Old Town Jensens. She's the most interesting woman I've ever met." He didn't even try to hide his bragging. Dale never did. Frank feigned casual interest, keeping his tone flat. "Jensen, you say? Thought I recognized the name. Old money. You don't often see her out and about." He paused, letting the silence draw Dale out. "What's she like?" Dale chuckled, a low, confident sound. "Lively, definitely lively, full of fire. Keeps you on your toes, you know? Not like the others. Hard to tame." He took another drag, clearly enjoying the role of the adventurous tamer. "But that's the fun of it, isn't it?" "Sounds like it," Frank said, though his mind was already cataloging the details. Sarah Jensen, old money, almost as wealthy as his own family, perhaps more so, lively, spirited, not easily tamed, all useful. Dale went on, warming to his subject. "I'm thinking of settling down, you know. Got to at some point. She'd make a fine wife. But she's got some reservations. Says I'm not the right match." He scoffed, as if the idea was ludicrous. "She'll come around." Frank had gleaned all he needed. He straightened up, pushing off the railing. "Well, good luck then, Dale." He dropped his cigarette butt onto the ground and crushed it with his shoe, already turning to go. Dale took a final deep puff, watching Frank. "Luck has nothing to do with this, Frank. She can't get enough of me." His voice was laced with a thick, self-assured confidence, completely oblivious to the real game at play. Frank didn't respond, just walked back inside, leaving Dale alone on the terrace with his cigar and his self-satisfaction. He returned to his table, picked up his drink, and observed. A few minutes later, Sarah Jensen emerged from the dining area, alone, heading for the cloakroom. She collected her coat, then disappeared out the main doors, a cab waiting for her at the curb. He noted the precise timing. "Pete," Frank said, turning to Olson, who was still dissecting market trends. "What do you know about Sarah Jensen?" Pete looked up, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Sarah Jensen? From the Jensens on Elm Street? What's your sudden interest, Frank?" "Just curious," Frank replied, his voice even. "Saw her with Peterson tonight." Pete leaned back, a knowing smile on his face. "Ah, Dale, always chasing the prettiest ones. Sarah's been a beauty since she was a little girl, a real stunner. The Jensens kept her pretty close guarded, old-fashioned family. But she's 18 now, just out of finishing school, starting to explore her options, I suppose. Been seen quite a bit with Dale Peterson lately." The next few weeks were a carefully orchestrated dance. Frank found himself, by design, at many of the same social functions as Sarah and Dale. Garden parties, charity galas, afternoon teas at the club. Dale was predictably everywhere Sarah was, utterly smitten, a puppy dog with expensive clothes. He followed her around, fetching drinks, whispering into her ear, his possessiveness thinly veiled. Sarah, for her part, seemed distant, almost performative in her disinterest. She'd smile politely, engage in conversation, but her eyes held a certain guarded quality. Yet when her gaze drifted, it often found Frank. A quick, encouraging glance, a subtle tilt of her head. It wasn't overt flirting, but an unspoken invitation, a quiet challenge for him to act, to do something different. He knew then that Dale was merely a placeholder, a temporary distraction. Frank wasn't interested in battling Dale over cocktails. He had a different approach in mind, one that respected tradition while subtly, effectively, undermining Dale's casual courtship. He spent a few days discreetly gathering information on Sarah's father, Carl Jensen. Carl was a pillar of the community, a man of old money, even more established than the Millers. His wealth wasn't in factories or finance, but in vast landholdings, timber, and quiet, generational businesses that were rarely spoken of, only felt. A patriarch, respected and traditional. Leveraging his own family name, a name that still held considerable weight in the city, Frank arranged a meeting with Carl Jensen. It wasn't difficult. A call to Carl's secretary, a mention of Frank Miller Sr., and a time was set. Carl Jensen's office was downtown, in a building that had stood since the turn of the century. The interior was all dark wood, leather, and hushed silence. Carl himself was composed, polished, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and assessing. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, his hands clasped, waiting. Frank didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew Carl Jensen valued directness and respect. "Mr. Jensen," he began, his voice steady, "I appreciate you seeing me. My name is Frank Miller." Carl nodded. "I know who you are, Frank. Your father and I have crossed paths a few times over the years. What can I do for you?" "I met your daughter, Sarah," Frank stated, looking directly into Carl's eyes, "a few weeks ago at the Lakeside Ballroom. She made a strong impression on me, a very strong impression." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I'm a man who believes in proper procedure, sir, and I know that to pursue a woman of Sarah's standing, a man needs her father's blessing." Carl Jensen leaned back slightly in his chair, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He was a traditionalist, a man who still believed in the old ways, in decorum and respect. This direct, formal approach, so different from the casual entanglements he undoubtedly saw among younger men, resonated deeply with him. "You are a credit to your family, Frank," Carl said, his voice measured. "Few young men bother with such formalities these days. It speaks well of you." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "You have my permission to call on Sarah. I would, in fact, like to invite you to dinner this very evening. A casual family affair, 8 o'clock." A surge of triumph, cold and precise, went through Frank. Casual family affair. He had circumvented Dale entirely, not by confrontation, but by respect, by understanding the unspoken rules of this old money world. "Thank you, Mr. Jensen." I would be honored. He spent the rest of the afternoon preparing meticulously. A white linen suit, freshly pressed, a neatly knotted silk tie, a subtle blue. His shoes shined to a mirror polish. Every detail spoke of respect, of seriousness, of intent. He wasn't some young roue chasing a pretty face. He was a suitor, a potential match. At precisely 8 o'clock, he stood on the wide porch of the Jensen residence, a grand, imposing house on the exclusive North Shore. A butler, tall and impeccably dressed, answered the door, leading him through a hushed entrance hall into a formal dining room. The long mahogany table was already set, gleaming under the soft light of a crystal chandelier. Carl Jensen sat at the head, his wife, a quietly elegant woman, at the other. Sarah was seated at the far end, flanked by two younger girls, her sisters, their faces bright with curiosity. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes meeting his. There was no surprise, only a knowing look, a subtle acknowledgement of the game he had chosen to play, the customs of proper courtship. She understood them as well as he did. The dinner table was a theater of quiet observation. Carl Jensen, at the head, presided with a stoic grace, his eyes missing nothing. His wife, a woman of delicate features and sharp intelligence, sat opposite him, her gaze equally assessing. Frank, seated next to one of Sarah's younger sisters, maintained a posture of respectful attention. He engaged in polite, calculated conversation, steering it towards topics that would resonate with his hosts. He spoke of the importance of community involvement, the steady growth of Midwestern industries, and the enduring values of family legacy. He shared carefully crafted anecdotes, highlighting his family's long-standing respectability and, by extension, his own serious intentions. He was the picture of a responsible, ambitious young man, a suitable match. Throughout the meal, amidst the clinking of silverware and the hushed conversation, Frank exchanged subtle, meaningful glances with Sarah. Her dark eyes, observant and intelligent, would meet his across the long table. There was an undercurrent of understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of his bold move, of the strategy he had employed. It wasn't just Frank playing a part. She was a participant in this quiet drama, a willing observer of his calculated courtship. Her small, almost imperceptible smiles, when her parents' attention was elsewhere, were affirmation enough. After the dessert plates were cleared, Carl invited him to stay for coffee and conversation in the sitting room. It was a clear sign of approval, a transition from formal assessment to potential acceptance. Frank accepted, a quiet triumph stirring within him. He engaged Carl in a discussion about the state of local businesses, the intricacies of land development, and the shifting political landscape of the city. He listened attentively, offered thoughtful questions, and presented his own opinions with a measured confidence. He spoke about his medical training, not as an escape from responsibility, but as a commitment to service, a carefully spun narrative that resonated with Carl's traditional values. Sarah occasionally joined the conversation, her intelligence and wit shining through. She had opinions, articulate and well-reasoned, that surprised Frank with their depth. She spoke about social reforms, about the need for better educational opportunities for women, her passion evident in the slight flush that rose to her cheeks. She was not just a beautiful face, she was a mind. Before leaving, as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10, Frank turned to Carl and his wife. "Mr. and Mrs. Jensen," he said, his voice sincere, "thank you for your incredible hospitality this evening. It was truly a pleasure." He then looked directly at Carl. "I sincerely hope you will permit me to continue calling on Sarah." Carl's smile was warm, genuine. "You are welcome here any time, Frank. We would be pleased to have you." The invitation was clear, an open door to their home, and to Sarah. Frank had gained access. As the butler opened the heavy front door, Sarah walked with him to the threshold. In the soft glow of the porch light, she gave him a look, a blend of challenge and invitation. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. It was a look that confirmed his victory over Dale Peterson, a silent acknowledgement that he had won this round. A thrill coursed through him then, a sense of control and accomplishment that was a stark, almost painful contrast to the desolation he felt now, sitting in his quiet suburban home, years later. That past victory, now a bitter memory, highlighted the cyclical nature of his current pain. The excitement of the chase, the cunning involved, the precise execution of his plan to win Sarah. It had all been a precursor, a training ground for his current desire for revenge. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what a man is truly capable of when his world is shattered? Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The courtship of Sarah Jensen, once set in motion, progressed with a swift, almost predetermined rhythm. Approved visits to the Jensen home became regular. Dinners, afternoon calls, shared strolls through manicured gardens. They attended social engagements together, their presence a quiet announcement of a budding romance sanctioned by two powerful families. Dale Peterson, with his easy charm and casual disregard for tradition, quickly faded from Sarah's social orbit. He was outmaneuvered, forgotten, like a minor character in a play whose purpose had been served. Frank and Sarah quickly became the talk of their social circle. The Miller and Jensen names together held a significant weight, and their union was seen as a powerful match, cementing their status within the city's upper echelons. The engagement was announced with a lavish affair at the Grand Hotel Ballroom, a spectacle of champagne and whispered congratulations that reinforced their position. The wedding followed 6 months later, an even grander event reported in all the society columns, solidifying their union not just between themselves, but in the eyes of an appreciative society. Frank felt a genuine affection for Sarah, a warmth that grew steadily in those early days. It was mixed, undeniably, with the deep satisfaction of having won her, of having executed his plan flawlessly. She was intelligent, spirited, and beautiful, everything he had desired. But beyond the conquest, he found himself truly enjoying her company. He remembered the early years of their marriage, a period of shared experiences that slowly, naturally, led to a deeper closeness. Sarah brought a vibrancy to his life that he hadn't realized was missing. She challenged his idle existence, her keen mind and strong opinions nudging him out of his complacent comfort. He found himself throwing more actively into the family business, not just out of obligation, but with a new sense of purpose, a desire to build something tangible alongside his wife. They collaborated on charity committees, discussed local politics, and envisioned a future together that felt robust and full of promise. They built a beautiful home on a quiet, tree-lined street, a testament to their combined tastes and wealth. They started a family, their first child, a son, bringing a new dimension to their lives. They had a second, a daughter. It was the very picture of success and happiness, the idyllic Midwestern life, carefully constructed and admired by all who knew them. Frank genuinely believed he had everything he ever wanted, the perfect wife, the perfect life, the envy of his peers, the quiet pride in his family's eyes. Yet a quiet unease sometimes lingered, a faint echo of the manipulation that had brought them together. It was a fleeting shadow, a whisper of doubt that he quickly pushed aside. He focused on the present, the solid reality of their shared life, the warmth of Sarah's hand in his, the innocent laughter of their children. These thoughts were inconvenient, uncomfortable, and he had learned long ago to bury such things deep. The narrative of his life with Sarah was one of success, of a man who got what he wanted. But he couldn't shake the nagging question, sometimes surfacing in the quiet hours of the night. Do certain actions, even if they lead to what seems like success, carry hidden costs? Did he truly love Sarah, or was she simply the ultimate conquest, the symbol of his ability to get precisely what he wanted, to orchestrate the world to his liking? The line blurred, wished in the comfortable haze of years and shared history. Years passed, blurring into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. The initial thrill of Frank and Sarah's life together, the excitement of their grand wedding and the early days of building a family began to settle into a well-worn routine. The grand house, once filled with newness, now held the familiar scent of old wood and quiet domesticity. The children grew, their laughter filling the rooms, then fading as they left for school, then college, then their own lives. Frank, though outwardly successful in business, his name synonymous with quiet power and influence in the city, found himself feeling a familiar restlessness. The old ennui, the quiet dissatisfaction that had always shadowed his privileged existence, began to creep back in. He remembered the subtle distances that started to grow between him and Sarah. Not a dramatic shift, but a gradual widening of a chasm. Their conversations, once vibrant and exploratory, became more transactional. They discussed the children's schooling, upcoming social obligations, the household budget, the intimacy, the quiet sharing of thoughts and vulnerabilities, slowly receded, replaced by a functional politeness. He found himself working longer hours, immersing himself in the demands of his business, finding a strange solace in the predictable logic of numbers and deals. It was easier, less complicated than navigating the unspoken spaces between him and his wife. Sarah, too, seemed to find her own interests, her own routines outside of their shared life. Her charity work expanded, her garden grew more elaborate, her social engagements more frequent. They were two parallel lines moving smoothly alongside each other, rarely intersecting. A sense of unspoken resentment or disappointment began to fester beneath the perfect, polished surface of their lives, like a hidden crack in expensive porcelain. Frank reflected on his own role in this growing distance, his past tendency toward detachment, his emotional remove. He had always been an observer, a strategist, more comfortable with plans than raw feelings. He recalled a specific argument, one of the few truly raw moments in their later marriage. Sarah had stood by the fireplace, her back to him, her voice low and tight with emotion. She'd spoken of feeling overlooked, of a sense that he was never truly present, always a step removed. He remembered dismissing her concerns, his words cool even. "You're just tired, Sarah. It's been a long week. You women sometimes get a bit emotional, that's all." He'd attributed her genuine hurt to a woman's emotional nature, a convenient dismissal that allowed him to avoid introspection. He had seen it as a minor inconvenience, a momentary ripple in their otherwise placid existence. Now, the memory hung heavy, a testament to his own blindness, his refusal to truly see her. The memory of his own past deception in winning Sarah, the calculated courtship, the carefully constructed image he had presented, now felt like a hollow victory. He had won her, yes, but at what cost? He wondered if his initial pursuit had been rooted in genuine love, or merely the desire to possess what another man wanted, to prove his own prowess, to control a situation. The narrative he had spun for himself, that he had earned her, now unraveled. The foundation of their relationship, built partly on cunning, was always fragile, always susceptible to the subtle shifts of time and human nature. He started to see the parallels, stark and undeniable, between his youthful actions and Brenda's current infidelity. He had orchestrated a betrayal in his past, a subtle social maneuver that had stolen Sarah away from Dale. He had taken what he wanted, regardless of the emotional collateral. And now the bitter irony settled over him, cold and heavy. He was the betrayed, the architect of a past deception, now on the receiving end of a new, more painful one. The wheel had turned. Back in the present, the neatly organized packet of papers from Mr. Schmidt lay on the polished surface of his desk. The information was thorough, precise, detailing dates, locations, names. Brenda's affair was laid bare, undeniable, stark. It confirmed his worst fears, stripping away any lingering thread of doubt. The pain was no longer a dull ache, but a sharp surgical incision, clean and precise. He planned his confrontation with a cold, calculated precision, a method born from his past, from the way he had once outmaneuvered Dale Peterson. There would be no burst of anger, no uncontrolled emotion. That would be messy, undignified. This would be clean, factual. He waited until Brenda returned home, her usual bright smile in place, before he spoke. She walked into the living room, setting her purse on the console table. "Long day, Frank? You're home early." He looked up from the financial journal, which was still open on his lap, unread. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a tone that startled even him. "Brenda, we need to talk." She paused, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Oh, what about?" He held up the envelope. "About this." He didn't offer it to her, he simply listed the contents, a litany of precise details. The hotel in Chicago, the specific dates, the man's name, the credit card receipts, the phone records. Each detail a hammer blow, delivered with unnerving calm. Brenda's reaction unfolded exactly as he anticipated. First, shock, A widening of her eyes, a sudden pallor to her face, then a desperate denial. "Frank, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. I don't know what—" He cut her off, his voice unwavering. "Don't bother, Brenda. Mr. Schmidt is very thorough." The denial crumbled. Her shoulders slumped, and a tear traced a path down her cheek. Then came the confession. Broken, tearful. She tried to explain, to justify, to beg for forgiveness, her words a tangled mess of remorse and desperation. "I didn't mean to, Frank. It just happened. I was lonely. You were always so busy." He listened, his heart hardened, an impenetrable wall erected around him. He saw the reflection of his own past actions in her eyes. The betrayal he once enacted upon Dale Peterson now turned against him. The echoes of his own cunning, his own quiet manipulation, resonated in the space between them. He had taken what he wanted, disregarded the consequences for others. Now, those consequences were his. Finally, when her pleas had faded into quiet sobs, he delivered his verdict. His voice was still flat, clinical. "This is over, Brenda. I want you to understand that. Our life together, this house, it's all dissolved. You'll move out. We'll arrange custody for the children through my lawyer. Everything will be handled cleanly." He felt no satisfaction, only a deep, profound sadness and a weary sense of inevitability. The sense of justice, if there was any, was cold and bitter. He realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that his actions in the past, his pursuit of Sarah, had not been without a moral cost. The pay-the-price theme he had so abstractly considered now became acutely personal. He wasn't just receiving revenge. He was paying for his own transgressions, for the emotional wreckage he had once created, however subtly. He thought of their children, their innocent faces, the ripple effect of this disaster on their young lives. They were the casualties of both his and Brenda's choices, and the thought was a fresh stab of pain. The memory of Sarah's face, her vibrant spirit, once a source of quiet triumph, now became tinged with regret, with the knowledge that he had manipulated a situation that perhaps should have been allowed to unfold naturally. He recognized with a chilling clarity that true revenge was not just on the betrayer, but often, brutally, on oneself. The game had come full circle. The house, once a bustling stage for family life, now resonated with a hollow silence. The sharp echoes of Brenda's confession, his own clinical pronouncements, faded into the background, replaced by the quiet, methodical hum of separation. Frank moved through the legal proceedings with a quiet resignation, an observer to the dismantling of his own life. Lawyers exchanged documents, assets were divided, and the precise, impersonal end to his marriage to Brenda unfolded with an almost bureaucratic efficiency. There were no grand, emotional outbursts, no dramatic pleas, just the cold mechanics of a life coming undone. He found himself sitting for long periods, staring out the window, his gaze fixed on the familiar suburban street. He reflected on his life, a life built on inherited privilege, on choices made from a position of comfort. The long shadow of those choices now stretched back, reaching into his past, into the calculated pursuit of Sarah. The grand hotel where he had first witnessed Brenda's betrayal, the place where his perfect life began to unravel, now served as a haunting symbol. It wasn't just a place of her infidelity, it was a mirror reflecting his own history of quiet deceit, of taking what he wanted through careful manipulation. He grappled with the understanding that he too had played a part in this relentless cycle of infidelity and betrayal. He had set the precedent unknowingly years ago. The wealth and success he once thought he possessed, the carefully constructed image of an upright, moral man now felt hollow, stripped of all meaning. They were just trappings, gilded cages that had failed to protect him from the inevitable consequences of his own actions. Frank found himself utterly alone, not physically, but in a profound spiritual sense. He, a man who had once orchestrated events with such certainty, so confident in his ability to control outcomes, now faced an uncertain future, a blank canvas devoid of his previous self-assured brushstrokes. The grand narratives of his life, the successful businessman, the devoted husband, the pillar of the community, had all crumbled. He considered the possibility of seeking true atonement, of somehow trying to make amends for the casual cruelty of his youth, for the quiet detachment of his marriage to Sarah, for the transactional nature of his relationship with Brenda, or perhaps he would simply live with the bitter lessons learned, carry the weight of his guilt in silence. Another Midwestern man with a secret sorrow. There was no triumphant revenge, no satisfaction in Brenda's downfall, only a profound sense of morality and the heavy, unavoidable consequences of his choices. He looked out over the familiar Midwestern landscape, the flat fields stretching toward a distant, indifferent horizon. He found neither comfort nor despair in its unchanging vista, but a quiet, enduring realism. The land simply was, enduring seasons, holding its secrets. A melancholic thought settled over him, heavy as a winter fog. The price of desire was steep, and the heartland had a long memory, unforgiving and persistent. He was left with the understanding that while he once pursued what he wanted with calculated precision, believing he could control the narrative, the true cost of those desires often only revealed itself years later. The bill, precise and unavoidable, had finally come due, and he stood ready to pay.